Well, it's always a good day when we get to celebrate what God is doing in the lives of our kids and the friends and neighbors around us and the families around us. And so I'm glad you're here today. We're continuing our series called After I Do. We started last week. This is the second week. And you may be thinking, wow, if I'm not married or whatever, is this really for me? Let me just say this real quick. Today especially, even if you're not married, if you hope to be married one day, you are married, or even if you're looking back on a marriage that didn't kind of go the way you want, today is actually a great day to be here because it's going to fit exactly where you are, and it's going to give you some things that will help you move forward in all of your relationships. But if you're married, it will especially help you in that relationship. And so I'm glad you're here. As we dive in today, we're talking about expectations. Now, all of us have expectations, and here's what I found out about me, and you're probably the same way. The more I build something up in my head, the more expectations I have, whether they're realistic or not, because a lot of times they're not, the harder it is when it doesn't turn out, right? You build it up, you expect this wonderful thing, you know it's going to be fantastic, you're anticipating it being great, and then it's not for whatever reason. And it feels like, depending, especially if you're really invested in it, sometimes it starts to feel like you failed, like you're almost a failure because you had built this thing up so much, and it just didn't work out. It just didn't happen. And I know I'm not the only one alone in this. As a matter of fact, there's a whole corner of the internet dedicated to fails, to things that people expected that didn't happen, that didn't work out. And Pinterest actually has a whole board on this. Not that I'm on Pinterest that much, but I found it while I was looking. But Pinterest has a whole board on this about fails. And some of them are as simple as building and making a cake. Like they're going to try out, I'm going to build a beautiful Lego cake for my son. Nailed it, It's crying from its eyes. It looks awful. I mean, sometimes it's something like that. It could be a lot of people went back to school. A lot of teachers went back to school. And you went back, your expectation, everybody's going to be there, ready, hands up, ready to go. And the reality is you can't even get them awake, right? I mean, it's like the first hour of the first day and they don't even want to be there. Maybe my favorite is going to the gym. You've seen this, right? What you think you look like at the gym. What you actually look like at the gym, right? In my mind, I'm the biggest, swollest, yokest guy there, and everybody else is like admiring me, and the reality is, can't even get one set out, right? I mean, that happens all the time. And then finally, something as simple as smiling. We have this lovely lady with this beautiful smile, and then reality is this lady looks like she's going to bite the other person, right? There's all these things we build up. We want them to be, we expect them to be, and then they're not. How do we deal with that? And should we even have those expectations in the first place? And how does this all pour into marriage? Because I know I'm not the only one. And I'm not even insult you by doing a little poll, but everybody gets married expecting it to be great. Nobody's getting married thinking, I'm hoping that it's at least okay. I'll probably be in it for a few years, and then maybe I'll try something else. I mean, nobody gets married like that. They want it to be perfect. They want it to be forever. They want it to be this center post of their life. But unfortunately, sometimes it's not. The shortest marriage on record, that I found out about, it happened in Tennessee. And it happened between James and Kate. James and Kate got married, and they did what everybody does, right? They met each other. They kind of fell in love. They started talking about their life together. They decided to get married. They had the wedding. And then at the reception, so they didn't even really make it to the reception. They got to the reception, and they did what a lot of people do, unfortunately. They drank a little too much at their reception. And in the process of getting married and drinking a little too much, they got into a fight. A big fight, so much so that Kate, which nobody knew this was going to happen, pulled a gun out from under her dress and pointed it at her now husband and pulled the trigger. Fortunately, the gun was not loaded, but pun intended, the marriage was shot. It didn't last beyond that. Oh, that was funny. Come on, that was funny. It didn't last, and that's a real story. They never even got out of the reception. What we want is Charlie and Martha. We want Charlie and Martha. Charlie and Martha met when they were 12. They got married at 19, and they were married for 65 years. They spent their life together. Unfortunately, at the end, they went to the hospital on the same day. They had been in the hospital for about 2 weeks, and Charlie was getting better. He was getting close to being released, but Martha wasn't. She was going downhill. And she was going downhill in such a phase that they realized that she's not going to make it. And so they decided, you know what we need to do? We need to get Charlie in here, and we get this picture, and he held her hand. And he literally held her hand until she passed. And Charlie, even though he was almost ready to be released from the hospital, he died 42 minutes later. I mean, so, in one sense, you're like, oh, that's so sad. On the other hand, some of you are like, yeah, that's hashtag relationship goals, right? That's what I want. I want that kind of marriage. So what do you do when what you want and what you get aren't the same thing? How do you manage that? How do you grapple with that? Because we all face it. We face it in every area of life. But I haven't found a couple yet. Maybe there is. Maybe there's one out there. But I haven't found a couple yet who would say every expectation has been met 100% of the time. I haven't found it. So what do you do? I can tell you what young couples do. Young couples, and I've sat with them in my office, either before they get married, premarital counseling, after they get married, having a little trouble, whatever, talking to them about it. And they said, I don't know what happened. We could just look at each other, and we didn't even have to talk. We knew what they were thinking. We don't even need words to express our feelings and our expectations. And at that point, I would say, yes, you do. Yes, you do, because they can't get in your head. They can't do it. I mean, you have all this stuff going on about how it's going to be, from the simple things like who's going to take out the trash and how often are we going to have sex and just all the stuff. And then even the big stuff, like where are we going to live and are we going to have kids and when do we retire? And it's all this stuff built up in your head, these expectations. And the assumption is, well, they just know, right? They just know. We don't even have to talk about it. They should know. Well, they don't. Expectations aren't met. Problems show up. It happens to couples who have been married a long time, too. It happens to couples who have been married for 4 or 5 years or 3 or 4 decades even. And here's how this one goes. This one's a little bit different. A lot of times what happens is when you hit a rough season, which everybody does, and if you're in the middle of a rough season right now, it does not mean your marriage is over. It doesn't mean you should quit. It doesn't mean you should do something else. It just means you're in a rough season. But a lot of couples, especially the longer they've been together, when they hit a rough season, here's what happens. And some of you are going to argue with me, but the reality is, deep down, you know this is kind of true. When you hit that rough spot, at your very core, what you're thinking is, it's kind of her fault. She's always like that. She always gets upset about these things. She always blames me for that. She's always expecting this. She's always too demanding. Or the other way, it's kind of his fault. I mean, we're doing fine. We're not, on the verge of breaking up, but things aren't going well, and it's his fault. Because he's inconsiderate, because he's selfish, because he won't change, because he insists on doing things his way. The longer we've been married, we hit that rough spot, and the very first thing, the knee jerk, most of the time is, you're not meeting my expectations, and it's your fault. It's not me, it's your fault. And what happens? It happens. Expectations aren't met. It starts off, it's a little hurtful. It's a little disappointing. It's a little sad. The longer it stays, that turns to anger and turns to bitterness. And for a lot of couples, a lot of families, their expectations aren't met. They don't want to blow the thing up. They don't want to give up, and I'm glad you don't. But they also realize, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I was hoping for. I wasn't expecting this. And so they get busy about doing family Inc. You know what I mean? We got to manage stuff. We're kind of coworkers. We're roommates. We live in the same house. We're taking care of stuff. I mean, somebody's got to manage the kids, and somebody's got to manage the checkbook, and somebody's got to manage the calendar, and we're really busy, and there's a lot going on. And so, we don't really have much of a relationship, but we are good managers. We are good coworkers. We're getting stuff done. But nobody got married to have a great coworker. Nobody got married because they were hoping to have a roommate that would help them manage stuff. Nobody wants that. But so often, it's what happens when our expectations go unmet and we don't know how to deal with it. So here's what I want to share with you today. Here's where I think the good news comes today. When it comes to expectations, first of all, yes, you should absolutely have expectations. You should. You should have expectations for a great life and wonderful relationships and a full, meaningful life. You should have those expectations. But here's the deal. When it comes to expectations, you need to shift the weight to make your marriage great. You need to shift the weight of those expectations to make your marriage everything that it can be. If you want a great marriage, you have to make sure you're putting your expectations in the right place. And often, the easy answer is to put them on to my spouse. I put my expectations on her. I put my expectations on him, that they are going to bring about this great life. And the reality is, they can't. It's not even that they don't want to. They can't. And so let's talk about this, because in Colossians chapter 3, if you got a Bible or an app or you want to follow along, in Colossians chapter 3, Paul writes something that, as I said earlier, this applies to everybody all the time, anybody that has any relationships, anybody that's trying to figure out how to do life well. But it especially applies to somebody who's trying to figure out a marriage. And so in Colossians 3, he tells us something. He says, look, there is a foundation that you can build everything on. And kind of his side point is, if you don't build it on this foundation, and he's going to tell us what will happen, where we will end up, and we'll look at that as well. And then finally he says, but if you do build it on this foundation, here's what it eventually looks like. And here's where your expectations are met. And here's why it is so different than what everybody else is doing. Because if you remember last week, we said, if you want a great marriage, that's fantastic. That's a noble goal. The reality is you can't do it the way everybody else is doing it because almost nobody else has a great marriage. But you can. You can. And you have to shift the weight. So look at Colossians chapter 3, verse 1. He talks about this foundation. He says, since then, you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Stop there for just a second. And I know that's a lot of Bible stuff. That's a lot of religious sounding words and Christian kind of things. And what is he saying? In essence, he said, set your heart, your hopes, your dreams, the things you want for the future, set those on Christ. Set your mind, the things you think about, the schedule that you manage, the stuff that you're doing, set it on Christ. That's where your future is. We talked about this last week, this marriage triangle, especially when it comes to marriage. What does it look like? And we said in this triangle, what we have is we have Jesus at the top, and we have husband and wife at the outside corners. And this is incredible what this happens. When either the husband or wife, and especially when both the husband and wife move towards Jesus, they actually end up getting closer to each other. That's exactly what Paul is talking about. He's saying if you will base your heart and your mind and set it on Christ, what you will find is you're building a great marriage even though you don't know you're doing it. He says the goal isn't simply, I'm going to be a better husband. I'm going to be a better wife. We're going to get along, and I'm going to try hard to break my bad habits, and da-da-da-da-da. No. Move closer to Jesus, and you will find yourself building a better marriage. It's just foundational. And so when you hear that, well, what does that look like? How do you do that? If you're not a follower of Jesus, you're here, I'm so glad that you're here. And I want to give you how you do that. It's not complicated, but it is a lifetime kind of a deal. Here's what it means. It means I'm going to turn from living my own life, doing it my own way, making everything about me. I'm going to turn my attention towards Jesus, and I'm going to follow him. And that my hopes, my dreams, and my future are going to be directed by him because he is now the leader of my life. Now, if you are a follower of Jesus, you say, okay, well, that makes sense, but what do I do? How do I do that? If you're a follower of Jesus, it means that on a regular, daily, ongoing basis, you are looking at Jesus and saying, you are the leader of my life. My hopes, my dreams, my future, my direction, it all comes from you. Where do you want me to go today? What do you want me to do today? What does my life need to look like today as a follower of Jesus? And over and over and over, that's why Paul says you got to set your heart, you got to set your mind, and you can get into all the language stuff and everything else. This is ongoing. This isn't a one-time thing. I'm always setting my heart on Christ. I'm always setting my mind on Christ. And when I do that, when I fix that foundation in my life, everything changes. All of my relationships change, not just my marriage. Everything changes because my life, my expectations for this full, meaningful life aren't on other people. It's not on my job. It's not on my spouse. It's not on my kids to make me proud. It's not on my friends and family to hold me up. It's not on all those things. Those things happen and they are great, but that's not what can bear the weight of the expectations of a full life. You've got to shift the weight. You shift the weight of your expectations for this full, meaningful life with healthy relationships onto Jesus. It's not up to my spouse to do all that. It's not up to my kids. It's not up to my job. It's not up to my friends. Jesus is the only one that can give me full, meaningful life. So I'm going to put the expectations on him because no one else can. And so he sets this fundamental basis, this foundation that we have to have. If we want to have a great marriage, it's got to start here. And then he goes on to, in essence, what everybody else says. Because that's true, right? A lot of it, yeah, but. Well, okay, but. Yeah, I don't know, but. Because everybody else does, and he talks about that. Look, continue on in chapter 3, verse 5. He's talking about all the yeah, buts. He says, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived. But now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. Here, there's no Gentile or Jew, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, or free, but Christ is all and is in all. In essence, he's saying, listen, You used to live one way. You used to have one set of rules for life. And even if it's been a long time since you lived by those rules, everybody around you still lives by those rules. And they pull at you. And they tempt you. And they challenge you. And they try to bring you back. And this is an ongoing thing. He says you have to be decisive. You got to put it to death. This isn't, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore, or yeah, I'm going to try not to watch that anymore. I'm going to try not to click on that anymore. He says, no, you have to put it to death. These are very extreme terms. You have to kill it and leave it for dead because you have a new foundation. And the expectations you have of this full and meaningful life, they come from Christ, not all that other stuff. That won't work. I don't love the list, but I mean, he captures everything. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desire, greed. And he says, when those things get a hold of you, and you know this, you've seen it. Maybe if not in your own life, you've seen it in people's lives close to you. When those things become the standard way of operating in someone's life, he tells you exactly what happens. He says, because the wrath of God is coming, he says, and then what happens? You're angry, you rage, you have malice, slander, filthy lips, you lie. I mean, he's telling you, when you live this way, when you do what everybody else says, here's where you end up. It's fascinating to me that 4 of the first 5 things he talks about have to do with intimacy. If you look at that list of things, he says you got to kill, you got to put it aside, you got to get rid of it, you got to leave it for dead. 4 out of the first 5 things he said, they all have to do with intimacy. And there is no more intimate relationship than husband and wife. And I know we've talked about this a lot over the last several weeks and months if you've been with us, because we did a series last time called Lost Privileges. We talked about if I'm a follower of God, if I'm a follower of Jesus, my life looks different and the culture is telling me one thing, but my life and what God is telling me is a different thing. And I can feel caught in between. What do I do? Where do I go? Do I listen to what everybody else is saying? Do I listen to what God is saying? And so we've talked about this a lot. And then the culture that Paul is in is so similar to our culture today, especially when it comes to something like sex. It is so similar in terms of what they're saying is good and is right and is acceptable and what God is saying. There's a huge difference. And so why do we talk about this? Why does this come up so much? I think there's 2 reasons for it. One, very simple. It's a global reason. That God has always asked his people, he's always told his people, look, if you're going to follow me, you're going to be different. Your life is going to look different. Your practices are going to be different. Your habits are going to be different. You are going to be different. And it could be that throughout history, there's been no more bigger marker of differentiation than this. When it comes to the value that we put on the closest human relationship that we have. And so that's kind of the global reason why. And if somebody looks at a follower of Jesus and somebody looks at a person from culture, there should be a difference there. But the other reason we keep coming back to this is because this is so powerful. This is so meaningful that God said this is only for this one single relationship of husband and wife is the only place that this is appropriate. Because it is so emotionally and physically and spiritually engaging, this is the only place where this is appropriate. And it's not because he's trying to hide or take away or steal anything. It's because he loves us so much that he knows if it gets outside of that context, it always causes hurt and problems and difficulty. And you see, so out of God's love, he's not restricting, he is freeing for something incredibly important to every marriage, but not appropriate for any other relationship. And I know a lot of people don't agree with that. I understand that. But I would say this, if you're a follower of Jesus, and you have to disregard what God said and put it aside and pretend like he was either wrong or he doesn't know to live any other way. And so he calls us to that. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about it. And when it comes to expectations, we fall into that trap. I've got this mindset. I've got this ideal, what it's going to be like and how it should be and how it's going to go. And then it doesn't. And how do I respond? Again, unfortunately, if we're putting our expectations in the wrong place and on the wrong people, what happens is that hurt turns into anger and that disappointment turns into bitterness. And so many couples, I wish it wasn't true, but for so many couples, that then goes off the table. Intimacy goes off the table. We're not, I don't have room for that in my life. I don't want to do that. We're going to get busy about managing the family, about managing the finances, about managing the schedule, but we don't really have room for that. I don't have time for that. And it kind of becomes this almost duty kind of thing, like your job is to make sure I'm satisfied, my job is to make sure you're satisfied. And what we do is we end up sitting on the couch 2 inches apart and miles away, one person on their iPad, somebody else on their cell phone, and they're doing the business of life, but they don't have a relationship. See, the same guy that wrote that this intimacy was reserved for this special relationship, he also wrote in 1 Corinthians 7 that this needs to be the healthy part of any marriage relationship. It's not no, never, it's only here, but it's incredibly important. So you see, he sets this foundation. It starts with putting your expectations in the right place. It moves to understanding that what everybody else says, what everybody else is telling you, is not necessarily going to line up with what God says. So if you're on that foundation and you're following him and you realize, I'm going against the grain, I understand that. I understand that there's going to be people and things that don't agree with me, and I'm cool with that. I'm going to trust that God's love for me is greater than the uncomfortableness that I feel in the moment. And then he tells you, and here's the result. Something happens as a result of that. Look at verse 12. He says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy, dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. In essence, he tells us, look, you got some stuff. You do. You all have stuff. And again, he wrote this in the context of any relationship, but especially within the marriage relationship. You have some stuff. And I wish you didn't. And I wish I didn't. And I wish your spouse didn't. I wish my spouse didn't. But we do. We all have stuff, things that we do, problems that we create, whether it's personality, whether it's bad habits, whether it's inconsideration, whether it's just unawareness, whatever it is, we all have stuff. But here's what's amazing. He says, listen, when your foundation is built on Christ, and when you have put all the weight of the expectations of this full, meaningful, power-filled life onto him, what happens when you look at your spouse is now you're not looking for what can I get from you. Because I have everything I need. My life is in Christ. I've set my heart on Christ. I've set my mind on Christ. Everything I need is there. I'm not looking at you for what I can get. I'm looking at you for what I can give. What can I give you? You don't have to make me complete. You don't have to make my life meaningful or it's not on you to be the perfect whatever so that I can be happy. It's just the opposite. Christ has given me everything. So when I look at you, my response is, what can I give you? Compassion, kindness, humility, patience? What do you need? Because you're going to have stuff. I've been told by somebody close to me that I have some stuff in my life. I love her to death. I've been with her for 29 years, but apparently she has a list. There's some stuff. I can share some publicly. Probably not all. But I have some stuff. I have some things that I do, whether it's personality, whether it's lack of awareness, whether it's just plain old rudeness, whether it's being inconsiderate, whatever it is, that bother my wife. So I'll give you a couple quick examples. When I get a drink, I love to chew the ice. Apparently I chew it very loudly. Stop chewing the ice, so I start chewing on the straw. Apparently that's annoying too. I chew on the ice, I chew on the straw. That's a problem. So that's pretty minor. I've also been told that in the car, I sing way too loud. I do. I car karaoke all the time. Apparently it's very loud and it's off tune and it's not very enjoyable for other people in the car. I laugh really loud, which also causes people to cover their ears. It's way too loud. I'm too rough. I'm too much of a boy. I'm a little too peculiar. I won't let the food touch on my plate. I separate my M&Ms and jelly beans into color before I can eat them. In my closet, I have short sleeve, long sleeve, play clothes, work clothes, short sleeve, long sleeve, right on down the list. I got all of this stuff. Like I said, I'm too rough, I'm too loud, I'm too much of a boy, and I still drink milk out of the carton. So if you come to our house, don't drink the milk. Little tip for the rest of you that do that aren't admitting it, hold the cabinet door open and clink the glasses while you're drinking it. They think you're getting a glass out and pouring it. It works better that way. These are just the things I can share with you publicly. And she has a challenge, right? I can either be perpetually disappointed, recognize that you are not meeting my expectations, and that my life is miserable because you aren't, you won't, and you don't. Or, which my wife does, I can find my fulfillment for life in Christ. And when I see you being too loud and being too much of a boy and drinking out of the carton and doing all the things that I don't like, and I got some responsibility here, I'm not trying to get out of it, but my response is compassion, kindness, humility, forgiveness. See, you have your stuff. And what you need to do when you look at your spouse is, look, you have your stuff. I will bear with you. You will hurt me and fall short, and I will forgive you. And my wife does this for me. And I would do it for her, but she told me that she doesn't have anything that she does wrong. And so I can't really speak to that. I don't know how that works the other way. But you understand what I'm saying. My life is complete and full in Christ. So my question isn't, what can you do for me? What can you give me? What can I get out of this? The question is, what can I give you? I'm coming into this knowing that I got my stuff. You're going to have to bear with me. You're going to have to forgive me. How dare I not look at her and give her the same grace that I get? That's this idea of a foundation. It's not built on what everybody else says. It doesn't play by the rules that everybody else says are the right rules to play by. It goes by what God says, and it results in a completely different kind of relationship. One that asks, what can I do for you? Not what can I get from you? And it's not because you're just so much better than everybody else or you're just such a nice person. It is in every way because of what Christ does in you and for you. And that's who we are. You see, as followers of Jesus, if you're a follower of Jesus, you know this. Jesus didn't come to make us good. He didn't come to polish off a few rough edges and give us some tweaks and some self-help stuff so that we can be a little bit better at this and a little bit better at that. Jesus came to make dead people, just what we were, alive. And when he does that, life is transformed. Everything changes. Oh, compassion, kindness, humility, yes, that comes out of us, but that's a mark. That's kind of evidence of what he's done in us already. So I urge you, I can't urge you enough, whether you're married or single, whether your marriage is going fantastic or it's struggling, I urge you, build on that foundation. Put the weight of your expectations on him. Find the fullness that you've been looking for in him, and it will transform not just you, but every one of your relationships. You see, the only way to build a great marriage is to build it on Christ. It's always been that way, and it will always be that way. Because unfortunately, if we do it any other way, we're setting ourselves up for failure. We have expectations that will never be met, and we walk away frustrated, disappointed, angry, and bitter. Or we find Christ taking us way beyond our wildest expectations, and we walk away with a full life. Doesn't mean we never suffer. Doesn't mean we never struggle. It means he transforms everything around us. Let's pray together.